Welcome to an extraordinary evening under the lights at Comerica Park. Tonight we gather not only to celebrate, but to honor a true legend to the game of baseball, Jim Leyland, as we retire his iconic number 10, presented by ESPN Bet. At this time, fans, please direct your attention to the field and welcome radio play-by-play voice of your Detroit Tigers and tonight's Master of Ceremonies, Dan Dickerson.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us to celebrate the remarkable career of one of the truly special people in the history of this great game. A man who for more than 50 years played the game, guided young men through their baseball careers and life, who brought untold memories to countless fans in cities from coast to coast, including a few here in Detroit, and did it with a style that was uniquely his own. Jim Leyland has been a part of the Detroit Tigers organization for more than 35 years as a player, manager, and special assistant. His love for the city of Detroit and this passionate fan base runs wide and deep. And tonight is our chance to return that love and appreciation in full. It is my pleasure to welcome the many special guests who join us today. First, please welcome the members of the Leyland family, Jim's wife, Katie, his daughter, Kelly. We'd also like to recognize his son, Patrick, who grew up in Comerica Park. We watched him grow up. He can't be with us today because he's got his own managerial duties, guiding the Kannapolis Cannonballers in the Carolina League. He took today 3.5 games in first in the Southern Division. I'd like to welcome to the podium our guest speaker for tonight's ceremony. He was the first ever draft pick in Tigers franchise history. Played for the Tigers, hit a home run in his first major league at bat. We're in the Old English D. He is Jim Leyland's closest and dearest friend, a friendship that goes back to their days as roommates in the minor leagues. When Jim was manager in Pittsburgh, he was the first coach that Jim added to his staff. He was with Jim all 8 years here in Detroit. During his Hall of Fame speech, this was the guy that Jim made sure stood up so he could be recognized by that big crowd at Cooperstown. Please welcome Gene Lamont.
Needless to say, it's great to be back in Detroit. So I think it's the best stadium in baseball, and for sure the best fans. I used to think coaching third base had a lot of pressure, but this is pressure. Right here, this is definitely pressure. I'd like to praise the Tiger organization for the show that they put on at Cooperstown. It was fabulous. Couldn't have been better. The induction was great, and again, did a great job. Jim and I go way back. We go back to 1966. We met in Tiger Town. Back then it was the Army Barracks. I'd like to say when I met Jim, I just thought he was the greatest baseball guy in the world, but that's not true, really. We really became close when in 1966, Jim went to Rocky Mount, which was our high A team. I went to Statesville, which was our low A team. Joe Cernich, who was the starting catcher in Rocky Mount, got hurt, so I was called to come to catch with Jim in Rocky Mount. Well, in those days, if a player moved, you usually took the guy that came. I'm not so sure Jim really wanted me as a roommate, but he took me anyway. We paid $28 a month and thought we had the greatest place in the world. It was from then on that we just became great buddies, talking baseball at night. We thought we had the world by the tail. We were making $500 a month. When we would go on the road, we'd get $3 a day, and if we didn't stay overnight, we got $1.50. But those were some great times. And Jim, was a minor league rat, I guess you'd say. His 11 years managing in the minor leagues, I believe, made him the manager he was in the big leagues. If you look at the players we have out in front of us, Almost every one of them Jim had. I look at Gibby there. He had him the first year. I remember going to Lakeland, him working Gibby like a dog, and became a great player. He had almost everyone, and I think they all got better because Jim touched them early. It's a little tough for me to stand up here and say Jim, because we know Jim as Hump, Humper, or Humperdinck. A lot of people say why. Well, back in the 60s, Engelbert Humperdinck was a real top singer. And Jim was a good singer. Matter of fact, I think if I could get him up here to sing Who's Your Daddy, we'd get a standing O. Little tough to do nowadays, though. I'm sure there's a lot of people here from Perrysburg where Jim lived, and when I call him Jim, I'm sure they think it's funny too. All the older people in his family, he was known as Jimbo. So, like I said, it's a little tough, but Humperdinck was always what we called him, and a lot of older players would do that too. I remember when Jim came to Detroit, 2006. We talked in the spring, and Jim told me, he says, we got a pretty good team, but we got to take the best players, not necessarily the most experienced players. And I believe Jim decided he wanted Verlander and he wanted Zamaya. And I believe two young players that maybe would have gone to the minor leagues, but I believe that's part of the reason, and probably one of the big reasons we got to the World Series that year. Jim just had a knack